Morgan Freeman exposes a chilling secret at the airport, and the world will never be the same. Morgan Freeman had seen countless scripts in his lifetime, but nothing could have prepared him for the real-life drama unfolding before his eyes. A police dog barked furiously at an ATM in the middle of a bustling airport. People walked by, ignoring it. But Morgan paid attention, and what he saw next would change everything. Is kindness true power? Comment 1. Or is success just luck? Comment 0. The set lights were dimmed, the film crew adjusting their cameras for the next scene. Morgan Freeman sat near the terminal, sipping his coffee, waiting for his cue. It was supposed to be just another day of filming, but his focus shifted when he heard the sharp, urgent bark of a police K9. Turning his head, Morgan spotted a uniformed officer struggling to pull back a Belgian Malinois that had fixated on an ATM machine near the boarding gates. The dog was not just barking, it was snarling, clawing at the base of the machine like it was digging for something. Passengers walked past, some glancing, most uninterested. Even the officer, despite his obvious frustration, seemed hesitant. "It's just a machine, Bolt," he muttered, patting the dog's back. But Bolt didn't stop. Morgan's brows furrowed. He had worked alongside law enforcement in various projects. He knew one thing for certain. Dogs like this don't make mistakes. Something was wrong. And then, as if sensing him watching, Bolt suddenly turned his head, locking eyes with Morgan. It was brief, a split second. But in that moment, Morgan felt it. A silent plea. A warning. He set his coffee down, stood, and started walking toward the ATM. What Morgan Freeman found next would leave the entire airport in stunned silence. Morgan Freeman had seen many things in his lifetime: scripted dramas, staged performances, moments of suspense crafted for an audience. But this wasn't scripted, and the way that police dog was reacting, it wasn't an act. As Morgan made his way toward the ATM, he noticed a female officer stepping forward, brows furrowed in concern. Ava Brooks. She was experienced, the kind of officer who trusted her instincts. And right now, her instincts were telling her something was very, very wrong. "What is it, Bolt?" she murmured, kneeling beside the snarling Malinois. But the dog wouldn't stop. Its body was tense, ears pinned forward, tail stiff. Morgan had seen that kind of focus before, a trained animal recognizing a threat. The problem was, the only thing in front of them was an ATM. Ava glanced at the uniformed airport security officer standing nearby. "How long has this ATM been here?" she asked. The man shrugged, glancing at the machine. "Years. Never had an issue before." Ava's frown deepened. "Has anyone tampered with it recently?" "Not that I know of," he said, already sounding dismissive. Behind him, a few passengers watched curiously, but most ignored what was happening. Just another day at the airport. Just another cop dealing with something that didn't concern them. Morgan, standing just behind Ava, didn't believe in coincidences, and neither did she. She turned to the security officer again. "I need you to call maintenance. I want this machine opened up." The man blinked. "Ma'am, it's just an ATM." Ava's jaw tightened. "No," she said firmly, "it's not." But even as she said it, she didn't know just how right she was. The security officer hesitated, clearly unconvinced. Morgan took a step forward, his deep voice cutting through the hesitation like a blade. "Officer," he said calmly, "if that dog is reacting like this, I'd suggest you listen." The man's eyes widened slightly as he registered who had just spoken. Morgan Freeman wasn't just a bystander anymore. He was involved. And suddenly, the security officer was scrambling to pull out his radio. I'll call maintenance." Ava gave Morgan a look, part surprise, part gratitude. "You didn't have to step in," she said. Morgan smiled slightly. "Let's just say I've learned to trust the instincts of those who know more than me." Ava turned back to Bolt, who was still growling softly, his nose pressed to the base of the machine. "All right, buddy," she murmured. "Let's see what you found." She had no idea she was about to uncover something no one was prepared for. When the ATM was finally opened, what they saw inside left everyone speechless. The air around the ATM grew thick with anticipation. Passengers walked past, some stopping to glance, others too distracted by their flights to care. But Morgan Freeman and Officer Ava Brooks, they were locked in, focused, waiting. Minutes later, a maintenance worker arrived, toolbox in hand. "What's the issue?" he asked, his tone indifferent. "This machine needs to be opened," Ava said, keeping her eyes on Bolt, who still hadn't moved from his rigid stance. The worker raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, I can check the system logs, but—" "No," Ava interrupted. "I want it physically opened, now." The worker hesitated. "That's not standard protocol." Morgan stepped forward, his voice smooth but firm. "Neither is a police dog reacting to a machine like it's hiding something." The worker opened his mouth to argue, but then he saw who was speaking. A flicker of recognition crossed his face. This wasn't just any bystander pressing him for answers. This was Morgan Freeman. And just like that, protocol didn't matter anymore. With a sigh, he knelt down and got to work. As the maintenance worker unscrewed the panel, the tension tightened like a noose around the moment. Bolt let out a low, guttural growl, his ears twitching. Ava's grip on her holster tightened. Morgan? He watched, waiting, knowing. The last screw fell to the ground with a soft clink. The worker reached forward, gripping the panel's edge, and pulled. At first, there was nothing but darkness, a hollow space meant for wiring and circuits. But then, a sound, a rustling, a faint whimper. Ava's breath hitched. "Did you hear that?" Morgan asked, his voice lower now. Then from the shadows inside the ATM, a small, trembling hand reached out. The silence shattered. Ava lunged forward, ripping the panel open wider. And there, curled up in a fetal position, barely breathing, was a little girl. She couldn't have been older than 5. Her skin was pale, her tiny arms wrapped around her knees. Her eyes, wide, terrified, blinked at the sudden burst of light. For a moment, no one moved. Even Bolt, always alert, went still. Morgan's heart clenched. "Oh my God," Ava whispered, immediately reaching inside. The girl flinched. She was scared of them, scared of the world outside the machine. How long had she been in there? Who had put her there? Morgan crouched beside Ava, his voice gentler than a whisper. "It's okay, sweetheart," he said. "We've got you now." The girl stared at him, her tiny fingers gripping the edge of the opening. Then she did something no one expected. She reached for Bolt. The police dog, so rigid, so disciplined, eased forward, his warm breath hitting her skin. And just like that, the fear in her eyes cracked. She trusted the dog. Ava took that as her cue, gently scooping the girl into her arms. She was light as a feather, too light, malnourished, weak, but alive. As Ava carried the girl toward the medics, Morgan's mind raced. A child, trapped inside a machine in the middle of a bustling airport. This wasn't a random incident. This wasn't just one child. He turned to Ava. "This wasn't an accident," he said. Ava's jaw clenched. "No," she agreed. "It wasn't." They had saved one child today, but how many others had already been taken? And more importantly, who was behind it all? The little girl had been saved, but the moment Morgan Freeman and Officer Ava Brooks locked eyes, they both knew. This wasn't over. This wasn't just a child getting lost. This was something bigger. And now, they had to find out just how deep the darkness went. Ava paced near the crime scene tape, watching as paramedics tended to the child. The girl was still too weak to speak, her small fingers clutching Bolt's fur as though the dog was the only thing keeping her tethered to safety. Morgan, standing beside Ava, crossed his arms. She didn't end up in that ATM by accident. Ava exhaled sharply. Number someone put her there. Her mind raced through possibilities. A trafficking operation? A ransom scheme? Why an ATM? Why in the middle of a crowded airport? Then, the maintenance worker, the one who had opened the panel, cleared his throat. Officer?" Ava turned. "Yeah?" The man shifted nervously. This isn't the first time." Ava's body went rigid. Morgan's eyes narrowed. Explain, Ava said, her voice sharper now. The worker swallowed. We've had reports before. Machines acting up, tech guys finding odd things inside ATMs, but nothing like this. Morgan's jaw clenched. What did they find? The worker hesitated. Sometimes clothes, sometimes food wrappers like someone was inside. We thought it was just homeless people hiding things. Ava's mind clicked into place. And no one thought to check? The worker looked guilty. We didn't think. That's the problem, Morgan interjected, his deep voice cutting through. No one ever thinks until it's too late. The weight of his words settled over them all. Because now, they knew this wasn't just one child. There could be others. Minutes later, Ava, Morgan, and a team of investigators huddled inside the airport's security room. Rows of monitors flickered, each screen showing a different angle of the terminal. We need every angle of that ATM from the past 72 hours, Ava ordered. The technician nodded, fingers flying over the keyboard. Moments later, grainy black and white footage filled the screen. At first, it showed nothing unusual, passengers walking past, some stopping to use the ATM. But then, a figure appeared, a man in a maintenance uniform. No badge, no name tag. He wasn't fixing anything, he was placing something inside, and then he walked away. Morgan's fingers curled into fists. That's him, Ava muttered, pointing. Get a close-up of his face, Morgan said. The technician zoomed in. And there, clear as day, was the man who had hidden a child inside an ATM. Ava clenched her jaw. We need to find him. Now. Morgan exhaled, his eyes dark with realization. And when we do, we'll find out how many more children never got the chance to be saved. Because this wasn't just a crime. It was a system, and they were about to rip it wide open. The tension in the security room was thick as smoke. Morgan Freeman and Officer Ava Brooks stood frozen, eyes locked on the screen. The grainy footage replayed again and again. A man in a maintenance uniform casually placing a child inside an ATM, then walking away as if nothing had happened. Morgan exhaled slowly. We have him. Ava's jaw clenched. Now we just have to take him down. Ava spun around. Get an APB out. Now! She barked at the officers behind her. The technician zoomed in further, running the image through the airport's facial recognition system. A match flashed across the screen. Daniel Finch, age 42, former airport maintenance worker, fired 6 months ago. Morgan's brow furrowed. Fired? Then how is he still walking around in uniform? Ava's mind was already racing. Because someone on the inside is helping him. She grabbed the radio. All units, be on the lookout for a male suspect, Daniel Finch, possibly armed. Last seen near Terminal C wearing a fake maintenance uniform. Silence. Then, Officer Brooks, we've got eyes on him near baggage claim. Ava bolted out of the security room, Morgan right behind her. Down the hall, through the crowded terminal, past rows of weary travelers who had no idea what was unfolding around them. Then, there. Near baggage carousel 4, a man in a navy jumpsuit casually strolled toward an unmarked exit. It was him. Ava reached for her radio. Suspect in sight, moving in. But before she could get closer, Finch saw her, and he ran. Finch shoved past a group of tourists, knocking over luggage as he sprinted toward the exit. Ava cursed. Morgan, stay back. But Morgan Freeman wasn't just watching. He was moving. While Ava and her team chased from behind, Morgan cut through a different path, anticipating where Finch was heading. The chase spilled out of the terminal into the restricted area near the airport service entrances. Ava was gaining, so was Bolt. The Malinois shot forward like a bullet, closing the distance between them. Finch skidded to a stop, spinning wildly, and ran straight into Morgan Freeman. The impact knocked both men back. Finch stumbled, disoriented. Morgan, however, he didn't move. He just stared. Going somewhere? Morgan's voice was calm, but his eyes were colder than steel. Ava rushed forward, gun drawn. Hands where I can see them, Finch. But Finch, Desperate, trap. Reached into his jumpsuit. Ava's finger tightened on the trigger, but before she could fire, Bolt lunged, a sharp snap, a cry of pain, and Finch was on the ground, pinned beneath 80 pounds of trained fury. Blood trickled from a deep bite on his forearm. Morgan exhaled, stepping back. "I wouldn't move if I were you," he murmured. Within seconds, officers swarmed the scene. Ava knelt down, gripping Finch's collar. "Who are you working for?" she demanded. Finch just laughed, wincing from the pain. "You think this stops with me?" Morgan's expression darkened, because he knew what those words meant. Finch wasn't the mastermind. He was just one piece of something much larger. Ava's grip tightened. "Where are the other children?" Finch grinned, blood staining his teeth. "You're already too late." Somewhere in the airport, another child was about to disappear. Finch's bloody grin lingered in the air like a ghost. "You're already too late." Ava's grip on his collar tightened, but the words had already done their damage. Morgan Freeman felt the shift in the atmosphere. This wasn't just about one child, this was bigger. And if they didn't act fast, another child would vanish before their eyes. "We need every available officer searching this airport now," Ava barked into her radio. Static. Then, "Copy that. All units mobilizing." Morgan's mind raced. Finch wasn't talking just to scare them. He knew something. He knew where the next victim was. Morgan crouched down beside him, his deep voice calm but razor sharp. "Where is the next child?" Finch's smile didn't waver. "Check the lockers," he muttered. Morgan and Ava exchanged a look. It was a gamble, but they had no choice. They had to move. With Finch in custody, Ava and Morgan sprinted back toward the terminal. "Bolt, find them!" Ava commanded. The Malinois shot forward, nose to the ground, weaving through passengers, ignoring the chaos around him. Then he stopped, near a row of airport lockers. Morgan's breath hitched. Ava's heart pounded. They knew what was coming, and they weren't ready for it. Ava yanked open the first locker. Empty. The second. Nothing. The third. She hesitated. Morgan stepped beside her. They both knew. This was it. She took a deep breath and opened it. Inside, in the cramped, dark space, was a child, a boy, barely 6 years old. He was unconscious, his small body curled against the cold metal. Morgan felt his stomach drop. "Get medical!" Ava yelled. Morgan, without thinking, reached in and gently lifted the boy into his arms. He was breathing, shallow, weak, but breathing. But how many more were still missing? How many had already been taken? Finch was just a pawn. And the mastermind, he was still out there, watching. The airport had returned to its usual rhythm. Passengers boarding flights, families reuniting, luggage rolling across polished floors. But for Morgan Freeman and Officer Ava Brooks, nothing felt the same. They had saved 2 children. But how many more were still out there? Finch sat in the back of a police cruiser, his smirk long gone. For the first time, he looked small, defeated. Ava leaned into the car, her voice steady. "You had a choice," she said. "You could have stopped this." Finch's jaw clenched. "I was just following orders," he muttered. Morgan stepped forward, his deep voice cutting through the air. "And now you have a chance to break them." Finch looked up. Morgan met his gaze, unwavering. "Tell us who's behind this." A long silence. Then, for the first time, Finch hesitated. Because for the first time, he wasn't just a pawn anymore. He had a choice. Through this story, we realize that justice isn't just about catching criminals. It's about protecting those who can't protect themselves. Morgan Freeman didn't need a badge to make a difference. He needed only his voice, his presence, and his refusal to ignore what others dismissed. Too often we walk past warning signs, trusting that someone else will handle it. But the truth is, real change starts with those who refuse to look away. Because the greatest heroes aren't always the ones with power, they're the ones who choose to use it for good.